As Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs go into effect, we are waiting on a ruling from a federal appeals court that may answer a crucial question. Are the bulk of Trump's tariffs even legal? During a lengthy legal argument on Thursday, federal appeals court's judges seemed skeptical that Trump had the power to bypass Congress and impose tariff rates around the world by using a 1977 emergency law. Joining us now is the lead lawyer who argued the tariffs case against Trump's executive order, former U.S. Acting Solicitor General Neil Katsya, professor of law at Georgetown University and an MSNBC legal analyst. Neil, thank you for joining us. I want you to take a listen first of this thought, talking specifically about the exchange between the judge and the U.S. attorney from Trump.
Can a trade deficit be an extraordinary and unusual threat when we've had trade deficits for decades?
Well, the president identified a severe spike in the trading deficit over the last 4 years that have caused, essentially, it's reached a tipping point. Right? It's affecting our military readiness. It's affecting our domestic manufacturing capabilities. So, yes, absolutely.
So, Neil, on the surface, it sounds like it makes sense, but none of it actually squares up. Talk to us a little bit about this case.
Great. Thank you for having me. It's terrific to be here. And what I want to do today is just, outline what the case is about. I'm not going to predict it or anything. That's obviously the purview of the Court of Appeals. But I know your viewers have questions. And so with respect to this question, the law that the president is invoking is a law that says that in an emergency situation that's extraordinary and unusual, the president has some extra powers. By the way, no president has ever thought it includes the power to tariff. It includes other things like blocking financial transactions and stuff like that. But no president's ever read it this way. And so Trump comes along and says, I'm going to impose the largest tariffs in decades. So the largest tax increase on American households in our lifetimes, basically, or close to it. I mean, Bill Clinton in 1993 is the last example of such a large tax increase. But of course, Bill Clinton went to Congress. Trump didn't do that. He just said on his own, I know what's best. I'm going to impose these. And there you had his attorney from the Justice Department saying the President Trump identified an increase, a spike, he calls it, in the trade deficit. And, the president said it was 40%. What he didn't tell anyone was that that wasn't adjusted for inflation. And when you adjust that number for inflation, it's just 15%, which is well within historical norms about trade deficits for decade after decade, as an earlier part of President Trump's own executive order said. So I think the president effectively pled himself out of court by saying in his executive order imposing the tariffs that this wasn't extraordinary or unusual. Indeed, it's persistent. He said they've been going on for 50 years.
Now, the judges seemed skeptical of the government's argument. That's happened over and over again, but that will make me believe if the government's to lose, they're probably going to go straight to the Supreme Court in some kind of emergency and try to get on that shadow docket. Do you have any hope, if that is to happen, that the very conservative, very Trump-friendly Supreme Court would uphold the law here?
So I don't want to characterize how the Court of Appeals saw it. There's lots of accounts of that. I do think that anyone who looks at what President Trump did here should be skeptical, whether you're on the Court of Appeals, you're an ordinary citizen, you're on the Supreme Court or whatever. I do think that the Supreme Court has policed the line of executive power in case after case. And I think this is a very good example of one in which the court, I think, would feel fully within its competence and institutional responsibility to set the lines of authority straight and to say, Mr. President, maybe you think these tariffs are really important and a good idea. The way to deal with that is to go to Congress the way every one of your predecessors has done. Right. I mean, what President Trump is doing here, no president ever in American history has sought this power to on his own tariff. Even in the Civil War, when Congress gave President Lincoln sweeping authority to blockade all imports into the country, they said it's different when it comes to tariffs, and that's up to Congress. And it goes back to the Revolutionary War and the whole idea that taxes and tariffs are super tempting for kings and presidents. And so there's special rules on them. And the most important rule, it's in the Constitution itself, Congress has the power to tariff, not the president.
Neil, I want to ask this. To me, and I say this all the time, not a lawyer, don't play one on TV. That's why we rely on experts like you. To me, when I hear this, the core issue seems to be that the president seems to be the sole arbiter as to what's a national emergency. Are there any sort of standards that are supposed to come into play? Because, you know, given how Trump behaves, he could say, hey, it's a national emergency that I couldn't get to ice cream fast enough, and so I'm going to shut down all dairy farms throughout the country. How do we determine, or is there any way to constrain or at least define what a national emergency is so that he doesn't just have this universal power that he can use whenever he wants?
That's such a beautiful question. It goes right to the heart of the case, and you're 100% right. I mean, I kid you not, in the court, lower court, in this case, Trump's lawyer said a peanut butter shortage might be an emergency justifying the president's sweeping powers. So, you know, yeah, where does this end? And, you know, maybe there's a bunch of people out there that think that President Trump will exercise his emergency powers respectfully and within limits, but, you know, a future president wouldn't. And so that's why Congress has always zealously guarded these prerogatives. And to say that the president can come along on his own and say, I know best, that's just not the way our constitutional system works. It's always required more than a president say so. It's always required Congress to specify.
Well, and I think, you know, listening to the president, he was earlier asked, and listen to this, he was earlier asked why he didn't do this in his first term. Take a listen.
Why didn't you invoke this law in your first term? You could have taken in billions upon billions of dollars in your first term, but you waited until your second term.
Yeah, because in my first term, I was fighting lunatics like you who were trying to do things incorrectly and inappropriately to a president that was duly elected.
So, Neil, it is not lost on me that the last trade agreements that were signed around the world, including China, was one that his administration brokered and passed. So why now? I think that is what a lot of folks are asking. Why is he so hooked now on these tariffs when you're saying, when you look at inflation, this has actually kept pace to where we're supposed to be?
Yeah, I think, you know, first of all, that clip, what he's saying isn't true. He actually did try and get that authority from Congress the first time around, and they refused to give it to him. And I suspect that's what happened this time around. Even though Congress is controlled by his party, he's obviously afraid to go to Congress. Look, I don't know the wisdom of whether or not these tariffs are a good idea or not. Maybe it makes sense to have, you know, these tariffs cost the average American household $1,300 every year. As I say, largest tax increase since Bill Clinton in 1993. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe he's got some brilliant economists who figured that out. But then go to Congress and get it passed. You know, there's no reason why you should try and assert this power on your own when no president ever has done so. And to go back to an earlier question about the U.S. Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme
And of course, as soon as you come to power, you start reinterpreting the Constitution, creating an emergency situation according to your own whims and ruling the country as you please, taking a 1977 emergency law and saying, I will use this to impose customs duties on the whole world. Excuse me, but that's like making soup in a toaster. We're not surprised, because you are the kind of figure who loves to create crisis in everything and try to emerge as a hero from them. But to say that the trade deficit threatens our military preparedness, that statement is so absurd that even the Pentagon would cringe upon hearing it. The calculation behind the statement isn't even transparent. They are shouting about a 40% increase based on data that hasn't been adjusted for inflation. But that rate is actually around 15%, which is normal for history. So there's no extraordinary institution here, extraordinary presidential obsession. The real issue here is that Trump is once again disregarding the fundamental balances of the Constitution with his I know best, I'll do it mentality. This country was founded on the principle that the power to tax lies with Congress. Let's remember those years when we rebelled against no taxation without representation. The British king was imposing taxes as he pleased, and we revolted to remove him from the throne. Now we're electing our own king and granting him those powers. Jefferson must be turning in his grave. This isn't just Trump's arrogance, it's an insult to Congress, the Constitution, and the voters' intelligence. And you know what's funny? He tried to get his authority before, and Congress said no. But now, even though his own party still holds the majority in Congress, he doesn't dare go there. Because he knows his own people can't say yes to this madness. And then he comes out and says, I didn't do it in my first term because I was dealing with lunatics like you. Oh, really? So the person who started a trade war with China defended the agreements he chose and then threw those agreements in the trash. Now stand up says, but I was busy. So the guy is now trying to blow up the deals he signed in 2018, and he's doing it under the pretext of emergency. He thinks we're idiots frankly, and worse, it's being marketed as there's a crisis in agriculture. There is an economic threat. The annual cost of this tariff to the American household is $1,300. This is, in the true sense of the word, a tax taken from the people but without congressional approval. And then he has the nerve to campaign on the promise of all lower taxes. At this point, we're witnessing a tragicomic attempt at authoritarianism, a cheap, crude, but dangerous game.